Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929 as Michael Luther King Jr. in Atlanta, Georgia. In 1957, when King Jr. was 6 years old, his father decided to switch both his and King Jr.'s first names to Martin, in honor of Martin Luther, the priest who brought about the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther King Jr. was the first son and second child born to Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and Alberta Williams King. Also born to the Kings were firstborn Christine, now Mrs. Isaac Ferris Sr., and Reverend Alfred Daniel Williams King, who is now deceased. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had 4 children, Yolanda Denise, Martin Luther III, Dexter Scott, and Bernice Albertine. As a young child going through school, Martin King Luther avoided all violence in all forms and pursued education. King was an inquisitive young child. He probed, "I like to get in over my head, then bother people with questions." Through the early education that he obtained from his mother, Alberta Williams King, a schoolteacher, King was able to excel in school.
Martin Luther King Jr. was always a smart child. He started elementary 1 year early and even left high school at 15 years old to attend college. He graduated in 1951 with a Bachelor's of Divinity from Crozer and acquired his PhD on theology from Boston University, the very same school where he later met his future wife.
Martin and his wife Coretta Scott were married on June 18, 1953. Coretta shared her husband's passion for civil rights, but didn't always agree. The FBI recorded calls between them, including small arguments and disputes, such as with their children, but there was nothing incriminating.
In 1955, an African-American woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat for a white person and was arrested due to racial segregation laws. This event led to the Montgomery Bus Boycott, which lasted a total of 385 days and was led in part by Dr. Martin Luther King. The end result of this boycott was a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional in December of 1956. In the 1960s, Birmingham was one of the most racially divided cities in the U.S. Black citizens faced discrimination both legally and culturally. In early 1963, King started a movement that would become to be known as the Birmingham Campaign. During that campaign, when adult volunteers ran low, King recruited young students and even children. Some of the atrocities during that included those of police department led by Eugene Bull Connor, who used high-pressure water jets and police attack dogs on the children. The movement ended with Connor losing his job and the municipal government changing the city's discriminatory laws. In 1957, inspired by the Montgomery Bus Boycott, King was one of the civil rights activists that helped found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, of which he was the very first president. The SCLC was one of the leaders of the Big Six civil rights organizations who organized the March on Washington in August of 1963. At the time, with over 250,000 participants, it was one of the largest political rallies of human rights in U.S. history. The March on Washington was instrumental and laid the stepping stones to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It was during the March on Washington that Dr. Martin Luther King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. Seen here is Dr. Martin Luther King shaking hands with President Lyndon B. Johnson during the signing of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. In 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King became the youngest recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize for all of his great accomplishments during his life. Over the years, King attributed his success to using nonviolent methods of protest as being inspired by those of Mahatma Gandhi.
Martin Luther King Jr. left a proud legacy, spearheading the civil rights movement and paving the way to a proud future for the United States. As he once said, "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward."